We were asking people about the spiritual life. Why do you think people didn't want to engage in the conversation with us today?
Well, today, I mean, okay, let's be real. First off, we are in New York. People normally don't talk to strangers. Second off, it is raining. However, I think the deeper truth is that we live in this place, and you can look around at Times Square where we're just so thoroughly distracted, and the ephemeral, the passing, the superficial has our attention. And there's a tendency to ignore the deeper realities, the spiritual reality, right, that is before us, it is within us, it is around us. And I think as soon as you start asking somebody to even consider that, it's like breaking into the bubble, right, of this sort of like narrow vision, this myopic way of seeing life that leaves me relatively free from having any responsibility, free of having to think more deeply about my own existence, what I'm doing here, and what my actions may or may not mean in the grand scheme of things. So I really think that part of it is that. It's like, oh, don't go there, don't open up that possibility. And even one of the guys I talked to, is like at first like, oh, maybe I want to talk. And then as soon as I mention God and the spiritual life, they're like, oh, I don't have time, And there is something about that, right? A world that's running around, the city that never sleeps, doesn't have time to talk about God, doesn't have time to talk about the spiritual life.
Yeah, that's great. Father, any additional things from you?
Yeah, I mean, it is New York City, and people want to avoid contact on many levels, but also, we wear these habits. The habit's like a sign post pointing to God, right? And they get it. Whether they're not sure necessarily what we are, but they know we're something different, and we're probably something about God, which therefore means we're probably crazy, right? And so, okay, granted, it's a medieval outfit, extreme retro. But why is it that people think that the spiritual life is crazy?
Yeah.
Because as the Father said, they don't want to think about it. Because if I think about it, then I may have culpability, because I may have to face something off that I really don't want to think about. Because there's a choice to be made. It's like Dos Caminos over here. There's two roads, right? That's the sign back there if you didn't get it. 2 roads. If I recognize the spiritual life, if I get past all the superficial blather that's going on around me, all the noise, then I have to, and I start looking interiorly, then I got to answer questions. Which road am I on?
Yeah.
And that can be terrifying, because it means you're going to have to make decisions. Jesus said very clearly, I've come not to bring peace, but to bring a sword. You're going to have to make a choice. It's my way or the highway. Right? So I think intuitively people get that, and so like, no. Crazy. Spiritual life, crazy. Don't want to think about that. And I think that's why a good chunk of the world's in that space.
Yeah. And there seems to be just like a natural skepticism too. So you talk about like not wanting to get beyond the surface. There's such a distraction, but there's also a skepticism, which to a certain degree that could be somewhat healthy in our world today. But it doesn't seem like there's an openness also to move beyond that skepticism, just to ask, to personally ask the questions that would take them beyond as well.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I was thinking about that too, because like one of these kids says, like, just like spread positivity and preach humanism. And sort of like this, the gospel of the secular world is that we don't need the spiritual life. We are the saviors. We're the ones that are going to fix it. And the sort of deities that we bow down to are sort of like technology and money. And if you have enough of either of those, then we'll just fix it all. And I can remember at one point reading and just laughing out loud an article that was in some science magazine that said, death is just a difficulty that science hasn't figured out yet. And so this type of just utter rejection of our mortality, of our contingency, the fact that we're not here for any other reason than it's just sheer gift, life itself. There's something, someone outside of all that which is visible that holds us in existence. And that therefore puts me in a place of responsibility about the 2 ways of Dos Caminos. It's like, I need to ask the question, I've been given this gift, what am I doing with it? And then when we begin to plunge into the spiritual life, then you start asking questions of like, who's at work in this journey through life, this sort of like story of salvation, and also this spiritual battle, like who's working against that? Because part of what we're talking about today, right, is the reality of spiritual beings that exist, angels, and as much as God is real and has the power of all things and has given each of us a guardian angel, and St. Michael, who like freaking kicks butt, is the one who's at the head of that army, there's also other entities, these evil spirits that are at work warring against and trying to keep us distracted, trying to keep us from going into that interior space, trying to keep our eyes off of Jesus, right? And to be aware of that, I think is also an important thing that it's that what we're doing, and what we're talking about St. Michael and the upcoming celebration or time dedicated to St. Michael's Lent is so important for.
Yeah, love that. That's so good. Okay, so we had some encounters, with people, both on the felt like very many no's, as we're just talking about, very many, but there were a few yeses. But before we get to the yeses, I'd love to hear a little bit about how those conversations went. What was your experience of the no's? Like, how did that encounter go when you got the no from somebody?
A no is a no. I mean, what are you going to do with it? I can't move any forward. It's like most of them wouldn't even catch your eye.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like humiliating. If not humiliating, it's just irritating. And it's just, you're like, hey, I want to talk, But I get it also. They're trying to go places, and I'm in a medieval outfit. They're like, oh, who's this crazy guy? So.
Yeah, was that your experience too, Father?
I mean, a little bit different in that I sized up my folks in the sense of I was looking around and thinking, as I look at their body language and what they're doing, who's most likely to potentially say yes out there.
Yeah.
So I was calculated in that way. But even still, you go up and some people, like, you start talking, and as soon as you mention like God or spiritual life, it's just like, whoa, nope, no time. Sorry, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. But at the same time, I guess again, like I'm used to that to a certain degree. Just as a friar, we were walking down the street in the Bronx before coming here, and I just looked at somebody and smiled, and they started saying things that I can't say on camera right now. It was just like. So I'm like, okay, this happens. I mean, when you're like a walking signpost for God, if there's something, and speaking about evil spirits, like if there's something present there, someone, he reacts sometimes. And also if people carry wounds or things of that sort with the church or with God, you're the one that receives that too. So in some ways, I think both of us are a bit seasoned in that kind of rejection and reaction that sometimes you get from people.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move to the conversations that you did have. Mm-hmm. So it seems like there were some good conversations, at least interesting, and different faith backgrounds of people that you got to chat with. Father John, can you share us of one experience of a conversation you had that somebody said yes to have?
Well, yeah, what struck me, so two of the guys, they had vague faith. They believe in, I believe in God. Yes, I believe in Jesus Christ. Do you believe in the spiritual realm? And he's kind of, well, yeah, like a question mark. Mm-hmm. And then like, okay, God made you and he gave you a guardian angel. Oh yeah, that's really cool, But then what do you think about the enemy? Like, is like an opposing force? You say, well, evil's really just when people do bad things, but it's not somebody. Like, okay, well, and I think there's a lot of people that really they want to focus, and it's good. We want to focus in on the positive. We want to focus in on Jesus Christ. We want to focus in on God took 2/3 of the angels and kept them in heaven. Only 1/3 fell. But we got to recognize there's an enemy out there too. We're getting sucker punched, and so I think a lot of people that are vaguely spiritual, they're not prepared for war, and it's a battle. And so that was one thing. One of the guys. So I'm talking about I only had really 3 good interviews. But one of the guys had a direct experience with the diabolical. He saw somebody that was manifesting and in a possession. So he was tuned in.
Yeah.
The other guy's like, well, I got to think about that. So interesting.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How about you, Father?
Yeah, I mean, great conversations actually with everybody. There was evangelical from Egypt. There was an Seventh-day Adventist from Colombia. There was a guy who said he was Jewish from New York, Queens.
Okay.
Moshe, and also one off-camera conversation with a young man that was great, but he was like unwilling to be recorded.
Yeah.
But I'd say that, I mean, as far as like talking about the whole idea of angels, the young man that wasn't willing to be recorded was actually one of the ones that was. It was quite interesting because he spoke about his first experience of God was when he was 4, and this kid was probably, I'm guessing, 14 or 15 years old, from the Bronx, and then he shared about how he had this experience later in life where he had this like dream and a very clear experience of like angels kind of appearing. So he had this awareness of that spiritual battle. I think in some of the other cases there was a little bit less, a little bit what Father John was talking about, this like faith and belief in, but not really like, not that there's somehow a direct interaction with us. And in one case, somebody who said that, again, like more of this, like it's just the evil thoughts inside of me, it's the things, as opposed to somehow spiritual being that's at work against our spiritual lives, our souls, our salvation.
Yeah. Yeah, the one thing that's running through my mind is, okay, so there's people have had encounters or experiences of both the evil, that seems to be the diabolical, but then also dreams about, encounters with God or angels in some capacity. My observation is that we don't talk about that, in the world much at all. And so nobody's even there to foster that conversation with that young man. Like, what do I even do with that? So for us as men who might be ready to engage in St. Michael's Lent coming up, what can we do? Like, what's some practical advice that you can share with me and share with men who might be watching this video of, hey, if you bring this up and you have conversations with friends and family members, how can I go deeper? What are some conversations that I could have to kind of break that open a little bit and talk about the reality of the spiritual dimension, the spiritual life that is all around us, but I may not have eyes to see that.
Yeah, so I'm going to say 3 things. The first is that develop a relationship with your guardian angel, like concretely, meaning like pray to, ask the intercession of, the protection, the activity and presence, because it's like, if you had this like BA bodyguard who is like locked, cocked, and ready to rock, and you just like had him stay at home all the time, like it would make no sense. You've been gifted with this incredible like companion on the spiritual journey whose sole mission is that you get to heaven. And so to have that awareness, I think, is something, especially for men, it's like, come on, man, you've got like a permanent battle buddy. And he's ready to be there for you in all sorts of ways. And I think that like praying to and cultivating that, because part of like with the spiritual life and even prayer is that I need to shake off the skepticism and malaise of modernity that has stripped us of a vision and understanding of the spiritual world as something that's real and a part of our life now, even if I don't see it with my physical eyes. And in fact, the reason we call it spiritual is because you can't see it with the physical eyes, right? I mean, this is...
If I could say is, you're exactly right. And to cultivate it, you have to engage them. And they're extremely obedient. If you don't ask them to do stuff, they won't do stuff. Right? If you start to ask them to do stuff, hey, can you remind me to do such and so, my guardian angel of God, right? Help me to remember not to forget so and so. Then you start to see his actions in your life. Then you're going to cultivate and develop that relationship, and you're going to use him more and more and more. And that's how a relationship develops, like a friendship. And you start to see he's got your back in so many other ways. You had 2 other points.
Yeah, I mean, the 2 other points simply are what, Exodus is already doing, but I think Jesus himself said in regard to the enemy that we encounter sometimes strongholds of his presence that can only come out through prayer and fasting. And so I think that's where intentional prayer for deliverance or for spiritual protection is a part of that, but also the fasting, that it's an interesting dynamic. I think it's because we are body and soul, as different from the angels who are just pure spiritual beings. What we do with our bodies has an impact on the spiritual reality of our being, our soul. And so this interplay for us, in some ways, like guys are, like I did some pretty sweet Spartan races a couple of years ago with my buddies, and we were training hard and doing all kinds of things in preparation for this, and including changing the way that we ate. And trying to kind of like both the like up the protein intake, and then also like cut down on the things that aren't going to be good for you. So I think the fasting is this way of sort of like cultivating the soil of the soul for a greater spiritual awareness, attentiveness, and capacity. And the Desert Fathers will say that the fasting is the wings that prayer flies up on. And so the prayer life is going to be the place where this like defense against the enemy is going to come. And then the spiritual life would like you got weapons, even when it's a Lent of St. Michael. If you play the St. Michael the Archangel prayer each day, like that's going to be pretty freaking awesome. And he goes flying before that, and I think both in the realm of spiritual deliverance, spiritual warfare, etc. There's also an authority and a power that's there, a prayer, right? If we knew that the Trinity was actually living and abiding inside of us, then when we encountered those temptations, when we encounter that like presence of the enemy, sometimes, most of the times, the way you experience his presence is temptation, plain and simple. And if you're like, have you ever experienced Satan? Most people would be like, no. Have you ever been tempted? Yes, right? Like everybody.
Yeah.
And so like, yeah, we've experienced him. And so when you experience him in that way, recognize, okay, what's the source here? Yes, there's psychological aspect of our humanity. Yes, there's patterns of habit, things that are there, especially with types of addictive, compulsive behavior. But underneath that, there's a spiritual reality. And I've experienced that personally. Where like prayers for deliverance, prayers for freedom from a spiritual stronghold allowed for a freedom in an area of sin where before I wasn't free. So I think to recognize that is super important. I'm sure Father John's got a lot more to go on that.
That was awesome. Father John.
Well, the basic way that we encounter evil is not getting smacked in the head by an umbrella, but the basic way we encounter evil is temptation, as Father was saying. As the Desert Fathers would say, the heart and soul of spiritual battle is taking captive your thoughts and recognizing, what are these thoughts? Are they true or are they not true? Are they leading me to God and the plan that God has for me, or are they leading me away? Take captive of them. Take captive of our emotions. Why am I feeling? I feel angry, Lord. I've got a temptation to get all bowed up and get enraged with somebody, or take that same energy and apply it a different direction, and I can either go to virtue or vice. Same situation, same thought. Will I take it captive or not? And so, but on the fasting, the analogy I use on fasting is like gives you vitamins in your prayer life. There gives you a strength that you don't have if you don't fast and don't do penance, because we are body and soul. It's like if you eat junk food all the time, you feel like garbage.
Yeah.
You don't taste vitamins in good food, but you know when you've had good food and you know when you've had bad food. So if you're fasting, your prayer life is like vitamin enriched, and you've got a strength that you just don't have on your own. And I would suggest also that in the spiritual life, one of the walkaways is you don't get if you don't ask. So if I don't engage my guardian angel, he's obedient. He's like, aren't you gonna?
He's just sitting on the sideline, right?
Yeah,
Just
right,
waiting.
right. I mean, there's people who've been given the gift of seeing the angels and demons, and they watch somebody, their ward, the person is able to see the demons outside like a strip joint. They're all that's their haven, and all the guardian angels can't go in because the guy walks in, doesn't listen to the guardian angels. Say, hey, don't go in. They walks in, guardian angels are sitting out there, not smoking a cigarette, but just waiting for the guy to come back out, because he went into a stronghold, right?
Yeah.
You don't get it if you don't ask in the spiritual life. So, to Father's point on the, be specific in your intentionality. Lord, I want to offer this fasting for this intention. I want to break this hold that the enemy has in me, whatever it is, flesh, whatever. Those fasting days are critical when you see your anger is going up a little bit more on the fasting day, or the lust is harder that day, or whatever it is that you deal with goes a little bit higher on those days. Take note. That's where the Lord wants to break you free from. That is not saying that you're getting more tempted those days, but on the fasting days, you've taken away all the cushions around yourself so that you're seeing what's underneath the hood already. It's not that you're more angry those days, you're already angry, and the Lord's saying, hey, this is what I want to work on. And so then you lean in and say, okay, Lord, I see that I'm more angry on these days. This must be where you want to break me free. Let's get free there.
Yeah.
And like I say, vitamins in your prayer life, it'll take you in places you couldn't go otherwise.
Yeah, amen to that.
And I think also just to add to that is that two things. One with the fasting is that both the offering it up for ourselves, but like if you're a husband, a father, then part of the real call that you have as a man is to be a protector and provider. And that's not only to protect from physical danger and provide material goods, it's to protect from spiritual danger and provide spiritual goods. And your fasting for your family, for your wife, for your marriage, for your children is just like showering down upon them these immense graces that you have a capacity to give, especially as a father. And the other thing to say too is that we're not powerless in the face of the enemy, right? Like Jesus says in Mark 16, these signs will accompany those who believe in me. And he speaks about in my name, they're gonna like command demons to go. And so when you're being attacked, your family's under assault, like you have this authority.
Yes.
And so it's like, if I feel this temptation interiorly, don't just be like, oh man, I'm like thinking that again. It's like, no, in the name of Jesus, be gone. Like lust, be gone. It's like anger, be gone.
Yeah.
My family's experiencing this attack. Like, come on, you're there to protect and defend them as well.
Yes.
To be able to know that you're not powerless, I think, is also important, which reveals the truth that as men, we have a very important role and a mission in the life of the church and the world. And that's one of the great sort of ruse of the enemy in the modern age that we live in, is sort of the castrating of men and the reducing of their identity down to just sort of being spectators on the sideline of life and glued to the tube, or, just sort of like moving in the most comfortable, easy, lazy river way of life I can find. And it's like, no, you're not made for that. It's like, right? We know David, right? He gets in all his trouble. Why? Because he goes and sits on a couch when it's time to go out to war.
Yeah.
And it's like the same thing happens in our own lives, and has happened in the modern world, that like forgotten, who is it that God has called us to be as men? And there's a definitive vocation and a mission for men, no matter whether you're married now or not, husband, father, that we have a call to defend and to protect. And the spiritual life is one that calls us to defend from the enemy and to provide for the goods that the church is in need of. And your fasting, your prayers, your intercession are part of that. And when you don't do that, it's like you got the Roman phalanx. It only worked because every shield was locked together. When you sit back on the couch and you check out, I'm fasting, you're stepping out of line with your shield and just sitting there on the side. Well, you know what that means? The dudes that were to your right and your left now are totally vulnerable.
Yeah.
First and foremost, your family.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If your father
Yeah.
or husband, fathers and husbands do not know the power that they have as Catholic men when they're in a state of grace, when they have a rosary in their hand and a Bible in their hand. Satan himself is terrified of a man who knows his identity. That's why this building up to the feast day of St. Michael is so important, because men need to know who they are, and they need to take on their authority and get into the fight.
Yeah.
Get into the fight.
It's time to engage, right?
Let's
It's like
do it.
it's the awakening of men stirring in their hearts to the call that is in each and every one of us.
Amen.
No matter where it's by the virtue of our baptism, as you're talking
Yeah.
about, right? Like we are priest, prophet, and king.
Amen, bro.
But the authority doesn't come from me, right? It comes from the Lord
In me. Amen.
and through me, and He wants to use us in that fashion and that way.
Absolutely.
So this has been incredible, more than I even bargained for, but I love it. And
Yeah, man.
I think if you're watching this, be encouraged, be inspired by this. Like there's a band of brothers, and we need that. And I think maybe that's the last question I wanted to ask about. So every exercise that we're offering and proposing to men is based on 3 pillars: prayer, asceticism, and the third one is the fraternity. So it's like the 3 legs of the stool, or the 3 tripod. And I think the one that surprises men the most when they do engage within this is the fraternity, is the brotherhood that comes forth from it.
Amen.
Obviously, you guys live in community and fraternity. There's the challenges, the vulnerability, the defense mechanisms that can be there. Just any encouragement to how to invite guys, or like how to foster a good fraternity, as you're journeying into St. Michael's Lent.
Yeah.
With guys maybe you know really well, or maybe some guys you don't know that well, but you're about to enter into this together.
Well, I'd say this. First off, if you're the ones that are leading and you're kind of maybe trying to pull the guys together, lead with vulnerability first. Every time that I've been in an awesome, epic men's group or sharing or time has been when the brothers have just opened up their hearts and started to get real.
Yeah.
So be the first to get real, because you can't ask that of these guys who are coming in that maybe they've not necessarily had the experience. And if you're a guy who hasn't experienced it, man, come and see. It is awesome. Like seriously, like fraternity, brotherhood is this phenomenal gift that is part of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. He never called anybody just to be with him alone. He called people to be with him together.
Yeah.
And he's doing that as brothers. He's calling us together to follow him, to walk with him, to fight for one another. I've got 5 brothers, so just sort of like, I was born into it, and then I joined it again when I joined the Friars of the Renewal. Friar means brother, by the way. But I think that brotherhood is this great gift, which is at the heart of it, it's like friendship that's rooted in Jesus. And so real brotherhood is always a friendship that has Jesus at the center. If you do that in those groups, if you put Jesus at the center, and for those who have been around, to lead first with your own vulnerability and your own like getting real and let your heart be open, that's going to make a space for others. And then we realize we're not alone. And then we also begin to see, oh snap, that's what he's doing in your life. He's been teaching me the same, he's been treating me the same way. And it just takes the mask off of the shame, the isolation, and the just like ridiculously boring, repetitive pattern that Satan uses in tempting men. There's no new story. It's the same thing. And when you hear it from other guys, you're like, oh wow, I've been getting the same thing. Like I've been attacked the same way, struggling the same way. I'm not alone. And then you both can get pissed off together at him and be like, not taking that anymore. Let's go, bro. And it's like, we're going to get in this fight together. Because together with Jesus at the center, like nothing can stop us.
Yeah, amen. Father, anything to add?
I think men just need to do it. They need to get together. I'm thinking of a group of businessmen that I know, and they decided a couple, 3 years ago to just do a Zoom rosary at 6:30 in the morning, 5 days a week during the business week. And it grew from a couple of guys to 4 or 5 guys. Now it's got it never has more than 10 men at any one time, but they're from South Africa, Texas, England, and they're getting together and they pray the rosary together. They kibitz a little bit together and see, just compare notes of like, how's it going? And they talk about how they have a strength that they don't normally have, and things are going better in their families. And we did a pilgrimage together in Medjugorje recently, and just to listen to them going so much deeper in their lives because they took the time to start to pray the rosary together as men and to pray for one another. They each add an attention for each decade of the rosary. I want to add this one for this, this, and this. And the shields are locked together and they're going forth and fight. And they don't feel like they're alone, and it bears fruit. They're asking for protection. They're asking for the angels to guard them. They're asking for these things, and they're seeing it happen because they're praying together. It works.
Yeah, amazing, awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks, fathers, for being here. Thanks for your witness.